Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth on KUNX Digital Broadcasting with me, Peter Robbins, your intrepid host, and a special guest tonight. In real time, we are 4 days before Halloween, so I felt a most appropriate guest, Freudian slip or otherwise. ABC News called Marc Hartzman one of America's leading connoisseurs of the bizarre, and George Noory from Coast to Coast AM said he's as bizarre as Robert Ripley. Hartzman considers both high praise, since his passion for the unusual started with Ripley's Believe It or Not and the annual Guinness Book of World Records when he was very young. In addition to his books about UFOs, ghosts, Mars, Oliver Cromwell's embalmed head, weird things on eBay, sideshow performers, unorthodox messages from God, and To the Hilt, a sword swallower's history of sword swallowing, which he co-authored, Hartzman has written extensively for Mental Floss, HuffPost, AOL Weird News, All That's Interesting, the Morbid Anatomy Online Journal, and Bizarre Magazine. He's discussed oddities on CNN, MSNBC, Ripley's Radio, History Channel's The UnXplained, Xploration Outer Space, the Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum, and dozens of podcasts. Hartzman has also been a featured speaker at various events for a range of audiences, including the Explore Mars Humans to Mars Summit in Washington, D.C., the Coney Island Congress of Curious Peoples in New York, ComicCon, the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival and Conference, and the Brooklyn Historical Society. More of his love for the unusual can be found online at Weird Historian. Outside of these projects, Hartzman earns a living as an award-winning advertising creative director. Today, our focus will be on his newest book, The Talking Dead, a collection of messages from beyond the veil, 1850s to the 1920s, and this is the expanded edition. And Marc Hartzman, welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be back. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. When you had originally told me about the new book, several things came up for me. One is that, as you know, because you visited, here in New York State, there's a legendary community called Lilydale, which I guess is the highest concentration of, seers and readers and mystics and channelers in America. Also, one thing I'd like to get into, because it really dovetails onto a very profoundly weighty moment in American history, that this phenomena began pretty much mid-century as far as the popular idea that regular living people could reconnect with the ghosts of loved ones past. And the resurgence, I think, really came right on the heels of the Civil War. There were so many people who had lost loved ones. It was going on before that for sure, and into the 1920s. Also, I remember reading that in England, there was a resurgence in spiritualism at the end of the First World War for similarly tragic reasons. First, a little background on you for folks that haven't seen other shows that you visited on. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and what drew you to the strange and unusual. I know it was, briefly in the introduction, Ripley's Believe It or Not, which, believe it or not, some of our viewers may not be that knowledgeable about. And, well, the legendary Guinness Book of Records, where did it really start for you?
Yeah, I mean, those were two really big influences for me when I was a kid. I loved them. I loved getting the Guinness books. At that time, they were like a little brick size book, paperback book, black and white. This was all obviously pre-internet, so it's kind of like the old days. The circus came around once a year, and everyone went to see it. Guinness books came around once a year, and it was exciting to get the new one. And for me, I just loved that first chapter. I didn't really care about like the second, 400 pages or whatever it was. I just cared about the first 40 pages or so. Excuse me. And that was where they had the human body was that first section, always in those years. And I was just amazed by the different proportions that the body could reach. So you had the tallest man ever, Robert Wadlow, who was 8 feet 11.5 inches tall. And every year there might be a couple different pictures, some different stats. It's like, oh my God, look at this. This is crazy. I mean, 8'11" is really insane. I mean, you look, if anyone watching, if you're a basketball fan right now, you've got Victor Wembanyama in the NBA, who's 7'4", 7'5", and he's towering over these 7-footers, making them look small. This is more than a foot taller than that. I mean, it's really boggles the mind. And then you had the world's littlest people. You had the heaviest twins. You had the guy with the long fingernails that were going down to his feet, curling all the way. So I was just amazed by all of this. That's really kind of where that was a big part of what got me fascinated by Sideshow. You mentioned Ripley's. I loved watching Ripley's. We'd watch that at dinner time, at the TV in the kitchen. It's an article I wrote about Robert Ripley for Bizarre magazine years back, which was a great publication out of the UK. And I was just, the show would obviously just present all these amazing stories to you every week. And of course the books were fun too, but mainly at that time I was watching the TV show with Jack Palance as the host. And so
Yes.
I love it. And I continue to love that, to this day. I also saw The Elephant Man when I was pretty young, I don't know, maybe 8 years old or something like that. And that really stayed with me. That's really a wonderful film, but those images and that story of Joseph Merck really stayed with me.
How old were you when you saw Elephant Man?
I was probably about, I would say 8 or so, 7 or 8. I think that came out in 80 or 81.
Yes.
And I saw it shortly after. I can't remember if my dad rented a VHS tape or if it was on HBO or something. We were watching it. We watched it at home, and it stuck with me. So those things were early influences for sure.
Would you say, I mean, there's little boys, like we used to be, can be pretty insensitive at times, but the fact that you can perceive a human being in such a biologically distorted form and understand innately that this guy was an outsider all of his life, and of course his wonderful mind, which spoke for itself, really. Would you say that when you were young, it was something you were insensitive to, or actually helped you develop an early sense of compassion for some of the differences that people have to live with in their lives?
I would say maybe did help develop a little bit of compassion for people being different. I mean, at the same time, you're a little kid, so when you see something different, there's still that innate reaction of like, staring at it, maybe commenting in some way, or, something that you look back at and feel silly for saying at that point. But I do think that it gave me more of an appreciation, like understanding that people could be very different in very, very different ways. And I always found The Elephant Man as sad as it is. It's also, I also feel like it's so triumphant, like the fact that he saw the world in like such a beautiful way, despite everything against him, and he had this amazing appreciation for the things he received in life, the goodness that came his way, and the people who did show care for him. And he just seemed to keep this incredibly positive attitude, when really, like, you can imagine how most people would just be buried by it. I mean, it would fall from the weight of it. But I always felt like as he's depicted, he really felt like a triumphant story, given his circumstances.
And in the world of film, of course, it was a wonderfully made movie and based on extraordinary stage play. Do you remember the first time that you kind of crossed that line from deep intellectual interest, even as a kid, to meeting your first non-standard human being, so to say?
Well, do you mean a human anomaly or just someone who did something extraordinary?
I guess a human anomaly.
I have to think. I don't remember meeting anyone like that really until, probably my late 20s. I'm trying to think who specifically would be the first. That's a tough question. I mean, I've met so many extraordinary people, and what I've always find is that I'll give you an example. This is not a complete answer to your question, but I think it exemplifies maybe what you're looking for. A couple examples. So one is when I wrote American Sideshow, I met lots of unique people through that project. One of them was a woman with a beard, as she preferred to be called, Jennifer Miller, who runs Circus Amok in New York City. And we met her out in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, where she lived. And, within, a few seconds of just talking with her, you forget that she has a beard. She's just a regular intellectual person you're talking with and having a nice conversation with, and you forget all about the fact that she's a little bit different. And the same thing went with one of the articles I wrote for AOL Weird News was about a show that Dan Meyer, my co-author, my sword swallowing friend and co-author of To the Hilt, was running. This was like 2011, I think. And it was in Indiana, and it was at Ball State University. And he was running a show that was a benefit for a project he was working on to help, help people in need in Africa. And he had an armless man and a legless man performing with him. So Dan swallowed swords. The legless man dresses up as Elvis and does an Elvis impersonation with guitar and everything. He's amazing. And the armless man does all kinds of extraordinary stunts. He's pitching a baseball. He's shooting a basketball. He's using a circular saw. He's doing everything. And that was Jim Goldman and Danny Frazier. And then we all went out to dinner. But as soon as you meet them, you forget that this guy doesn't have arms and this guy doesn't have legs, and you're just talking to them just like anybody else. So those differences, as soon as you know them as people, not like someone without arms, they're just people. They're different, but they're just people, and that's what it all comes down to. And I think it's one of those things. People look at everyone as different, but once you talk to them, they're not so different. They're just another person. They just don't have arms. They don't have legs. They have a beard, but they're still amazing people, just like anyone else.
Staying with this subject for a bit, how can I say? The folks that made the film with director Todd Browning called Freaks, 1937, I think.
32, yeah.
Introduced many Americans to sideshow people. And it's one of the most memorable and memorably uncomfortable films of its era. It's unflinching on a certain level and very stilted in terms of the acting and the dialogue, but it kind of cemented the idea of outsiders belonging in their own world. You're not one of us, as opposed to you're one of us. But the spiritualism aspect, of course, is completely separate in terms of your work. And I'm wondering how that curiosity began as well. Was it with an intellectual curiosity or loss or stumbling on a book, or what was it that turned your interest to the popularity of these folks who were selling a visit to the afterlife of somebody you cared about?
I think a couple of things. So one is, coming off of the sideshow discussion we were just having, I feel sideshow really kind of branched me off into lots of different realms of the bizarre and unusual. And so one of those, and again, going back through history, right? So sideshow's heyday was around the late 1800s, early 1900s. Same with spiritualism, really. So it's kind of like I just took a turn in the same era in history to something else really weird and bizarre that was going on, which was spiritualism. You mentioned it briefly earlier, but modern spiritualism basically is said to have begun in 1848 with the Fox sisters in Hydesville, New York. Two young girls who claimed to be communicating with the ghost in the cellar by rapping noises, and communicating that way, and everybody believed it, and this spread massively across the United States and across the pond as well. And so I found that to be very interesting, and it also kind of, I think the other reason I thought it was really interesting, besides being weird and unusual, which it certainly is, but I also, ever since I was a kid, I was sort of fascinated by this idea of the afterlife and what is there, and do we have consciousness in the afterlife? I always wondered if burial, what if we're wrong about what we do? What if we're tormenting all of humanity by burying us underground and stuck in a box, and consciousness is trapped or something, and we're just stuck in blackness for eternity? Like, these thoughts have rattled around my brain. You read my book, The Embalmed Head of Oliver Cromwell, a memoir, and you can see like a lot of those thoughts that was a vehicle for me to kind of explore those thoughts a lot. So these things have kind of always been with me also since childhood in that sense. Not a specific loss though that drove it, but it was more of that kind of rooted in my own curiosity. And so I started buying these books from the late 1800s on the topic, and I was just fascinated by what was inside of these books, these ideas, these beliefs, and there was firm beliefs that we could communicate with the dead. And I thought about how remarkable that must have been, because this wasn't like a small group. This was millions of people believing that this was the case. And you also look at that time period. We'll just kind of shift it a little bit, like late 1800s, post-Civil War. As you mentioned, Civil War was a huge boom because of so much loss and people wanting to grieve, and mediums then taking advantage of that, because they could, unfortunately, that's the nature of humanity. But it was kind of a magical time in the late 19th century. You had all these amazing inventions. Think about telephone. A telephone's like remarkable, right? Like, for people who could never communicate unless someone was within earshot, all of a sudden you could pick up a thing and you could hear a voice from a great distance magically somehow. Then radio comes along and it's transmitting through invisible airwaves. You can't see it. What is it? And then you have other, you have the automobile is coming into invention in the late 1800s. You've just got a lot of amazing things happening. So, and then going back to Mars also, this was also a time when people believed there was intelligent life on Mars, and there were a lot of big name scientists who were exploring that idea and how we could communicate with them. These were all things being discussed, in major publications and speakers and lectures. So this idea of maybe speaking to the dead also, maybe this is something that's possible. I forgot to even mention the phonograph. Thomas Edison, is able to make it so a voice can play on a machine. Maybe voices can play on machines elsewhere. Photography was relatively new. So you had spirit photography, and the idea of maybe the camera can see what the eye can't, and it's capturing spirits. So spirit photography became a thing. So it's just this really magical period where maybe it didn't seem so outlandish to think that we could speak to the dead too. So I found all that. I just wanted to really dig more into it.
What do you think it was about these young sisters, the Fox sisters, that captured first the imagination of people seriously obsessed with this subject, but then becoming part of the sweep of popular culture at the time? And do you think there was something about them and the way that they put forward what they were able to do that kind of signaled the beginning of the golden age of this period, or they were kind of a bellwether. They were an indicator that this was about to happen. Can you tell us a little about the Fox sisters, and what was it about them that drew the nation's imagination and interest?
Yeah, well, I will say that first of all, it wasn't like the Fox sisters were the first to have this idea of communicating with the dead, that or spirits or something. I mean, this goes way back, but they were really the first to kind of mark this new beginning of modern spiritualism. But just before that, because you said, was there something kind of bubbling up? You had seers like Andrew Jackson Davis, the Poughkeepsie seer, who was, visiting spirit worlds and writing heavily about this. And so you kind of had a bit of a movement bubbling up. And then you have these two young girls, Maggie and Kate Fox. And I think Houdini had a quote about this, which I'm going to butcher a little bit, but it was this idea of no one could believe that two young girls could possibly, make something up. Like that was more remarkable to them than maybe they were speaking to spirits,
Oh,
how could they possibly dupe anyone? Two young kids. They were so innocent.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot of this idea of like, how could they possibly fool us? That would be crazy. No one, these sweet girls would never do that, But it's worth noting that the first instance of them doing this rapping sounds in their home and then telling their parents about was on March 31st of 1848. So the next day was April Fool's Day. Not that they ever admitted that was an April Fool's Day joke, but it's worth mentioning. And then they were doing the way they were doing it. They were just using their toe joints and knee joints to make these sounds. And they would do a thing where, like, you might ask, yes, no question, 1 for yes, 2 for no, go through the alphabet, 1 tap for A, 2 for B, 3 for C. Obviously that gets really tedious as you get into longer words with letters further in the alphabet, so you could, zoology would be a pain. So anyway, so people just believed. I think there was a want to believe, a desire to believe, and then it just seemed possible. And then their older sister was Leah Fox, and she at the time, she was about 20 years older, so pretty big, maybe a little less than that, but she was, she was an adult, and she was living in Rochester at that point, which was a little, the Hydesville was closer to Buffalo area, so she heard about what was going on, and she decided that she wanted to help capitalize on this. And she, at that point, was divorced and had a young child, and that's not a great position for a woman to be in the mid 1800s. Well, here was a way to capitalize on this. So she brought the sisters to Rochester. They gave seances around Rochester, and they were a hit. Like, we're making money, and everybody loves us. And of course, there were skeptics already. Doctors were like, I don't know about this. And they were testing them and kind of figuring out what was going on, but it was too late. Everyone who wanted to believe was going to believe and didn't care what the doctors had to say. And so suddenly you had these young girls and Leah Fox, this young woman, and they were like goddesses. Like, they had this amazing role in society now that wasn't there before, where they were the ones who could speak to the dead, and everyone wanted some of that. So then they toured New York City. That was a huge hit. They toured the country. They ended up touring over in Europe. Wow. And this went on. And as I said, other mediums were, sprouting up all over the place because they saw the success. They want some of that too. And it just goes on and on and on. 40 years later, in about 1888, they were at a spiritualist convention in New York City, and Maggie Fox basically says, like, I was just using my joints. And she gives a demonstration in front of everybody. She's like, they were kind of hitting hard times at this point. Like, things weren't all rosy over those 40 years for them. They had some issues, I think, with marriages and alcoholism, and they had some hard times. But when it came clean, no one believed it. It was too late. It was like too far gone. And so they thought, well, now you're just trying to capitalize on being an anti-spiritualist. You can't fool us. We know it's real. Don't bring down an industry, in other words, that we're all making money from.
Yeah, at a certain point, well-known individuals became the subjects of some of these contacts. And well-known individuals also became interested in the general subject, either from a believer's point of view or a muckraker's point of view, to turn over the tables and prove that this was nonsense, at least what they were confronting. The names, Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, Oscar Wilde, Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Shakespeare. These were all individuals who were coming through in some way. Can you give us an example of any of these? And was it random, or was somebody interested in speaking to Shakespeare instead of their dead wife?
Well, I think they were. I don't know that for sure. That could be. But yeah, there's that's a lot of what's covered in this new book, The Talking Dead, that you mentioned, and it's a chapter called After Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and yeah, there's just a lot of really great stories about these luminaries from that period, or even earlier. Shakespeare came back through and wrote Hamlet in Heaven. This was the sequel to Hamlet. And these mediums were writing these like lengthy volumes that were supposedly coming through the voices of these ghosts. And they would often do this through either automatic writing or Ouija boards, letter by letter. I have one of them here. This is Jap Heron. This is from 1917. And you'll see, right here, it's there's Mark Twain.
Yes.
And you can see it says, right underneath it. It's written from the Ouija board. It's this, this is a whole novel about this young guy who goes to become a newspaper man and gets into societal issues and political issues and this kind of thing. But it was panned by the critics. In fact, Mark Twain's publisher tried to sue this medium for publishing it, because they said, well, we own all the rights to Mark Twain's works. And they're like, well, but it's Mark Twain's ghost, not really Mark Twain. And then, there's this back and forth. Eventually, they were supposed to stop publishing it. So I think, this is a fairly rare copy that survived. But then the New York Times was printing printing reviews.
Legal precedent.
Yeah. So you had all these kind of amazing things coming through. You had Edgar Allan Poe. People were writing more poetry from him, like, capitalizing on the popularity of this amazing writer, correct? And one of the mediums that I have in The Talking Dead talks about how Edgar Allan Poe came back and was basically much more devout now. A lot of times these mediums were using spiritualism for, to push the praise of God, this kind of thing, right? So it's like, oh, Edgar Allan Poe was wrong about all the darkness, and he regrets it now, and now he wants you to see the light. And he feels bad that he wrote anything that was dark and morbid, and wants you to understand that things are beautiful and light in the afterlife. So he's using that voice to try to correct people and shift their opinions, things like that. Then you had political messages coming from Lincoln or from Washington, about what was going on in the world, and all these just amazing things, that were coming through. Oscar Wilde that's a new one to the expanded edition. He was just ranting about, other writers. He went off on Ulysses, James Joyce for Ulysses. Actually, here, I have a great quote, a couple of just small quotes from him. Let me see, I put him aside. But he said that James Joyce's Ulysses, he called it a great bulk of filth, and said that the heated vomit continued through the countless pages. So this goes on and on. Just this ghost of Oscar Wilde crapping on everybody else's writing, which I thought was funny.
A bad review after you're dead. That's harsh.
Yeah.
Talk about kicking somebody when they're down.
Yeah. So I just love how these ghosts of writers were staying prolific, supposedly in the afterlife, and continuing to write. Shakespeare wrote sonnets from the dead. You mentioned Benjamin Franklin. He was writing aphorisms that were often getting more religious in tone, but also just some kind of interesting thoughts about the spirit life and what the spirit world is like.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. I thought I had a couple of those aside as well.
You made me laugh in the outline that you sent with just the phrase "afterlives of the rich and famous." Is a wonderful, very dry comedic writer in the 30s named Thorne Smith, and he wrote a very funny book called "Nightlife of the Gods," which we all have to cut loose every once in a while. When the spotlight in newspapers, in public discourse, in popular culture really was focused on this to a great degree, did there come a time when there was one spectacular fraudulent situation that was revealed or unmasked for what it was? And was there any kind of scandals that hit the paper around this, or was that rare?
Well, there were certainly mediums who were exposed. Houdini was really big on exposing fraudulent mediums. He spent a lot of time on that. So probably the most famous case with him, I'll start with him, but I want to go back in time to one more. But in the mid-1920s, Scientific American was holding a competition to find a legitimate spiritualist medium. So they had a panel of people assembled, scientists and, publisher of the magazine, all these big, men with big titles and supposedly highly educated.
Would this have been in the 1920s or earlier?
20s. Yeah. Early 20s, this started. So they had a $2,500 prize if you could prove, if you could convince them that you were legitimate. So Houdini was on the panel, and they went through lots of different mediums, and they were exposed in one way or another, or they couldn't be proven legitimate. And then there was a woman in Boston known as Marjorie, the Witch of Lime Street. Her real name was Mina Crandon, and she had started giving these seances at her home in Boston. They were just for family and maybe some friends. She wasn't trying to get rich off this or anything, but in doing research, I wrote about this a lot in my book, Chasing Ghosts. She also had been divorced and had a child and was on her second marriage, and her husband was a doctor and kind of a womanizer. So he was interested in spiritualism. So the thought is maybe she took an interest in spiritualism to help keep him interested in her, because she didn't want to lose him and be divorced twice in the 1920s as a woman. That would be a really bad situation for her. So somehow she learns all these amazing abilities to create voices and levitate tables and create ectoplasm and just create all these manifestations of spirits. Her brother had this horrible accident that was fatal, railroad accident, maybe in the teens. And so she started doing these seances where the voice of her brother Walter was coming through, and her mother would be a frequent attendant. So this was like comforting to her mother to sense that her son was okay in the spirit world. So things kind of started there. And then, of course, word got around. One of these luminaries who was at Harvard but was also on the panel found out about her. And all of a sudden, she became the big subject of the Scientific American competition. Now, meanwhile, Houdini was a busy guy. He was performing all the time. So he wasn't at all these seances early on. And they had many. And they said, we're going to award the prize to Marjorie. We think she's genuine. And Houdini said, don't do that. I have to see her first. We're going to be the laughing stock of the world if you give this woman this prize and she's a fake. We can't do that. We're Scientific American. So he goes up prepared up to Boston. And of course, he's detecting certain things. But he acknowledged that she was very good. But he also saw things I think he hadn't seen from other mediums before. And it became very controversial because there was one instance where he created this box for her basically to restrict any movements she might have. Because a lot of times mediums would do amazing things just by using a foot that was free. This was all, keep in mind, it's a dark room, right? So you can do certain things. You have the trust of people. Everyone might be holding hands like this, layered, and they might be able to remove one hand and no one even notices one hand has been free. And then they can wave around a spirit trumpet or, make you feel something on the other side. There were different things that these mediums could do very cleverly, but aided by the dark, and maybe having an accomplice as well.
Right.
So he thought, if I put her in this box, it's like a big wooden box with a hole for the head maybe a couple of holes on the side so the hands could peek out like this. But basically, very, very restricted. Her movements were very restricted. If it was really a spirit, it should still come through. I wouldn't need the use of my arms and legs to bring a spirit to the other side, right? So, so they put her in this box, they do the test, but then they find that there's a carpenter ruler inside the box. You know, those kind of rulers that unfold bit by bit by bit until it's maybe 6 feet long or something, which in theory could be used to go through the hole and then still like make a noise on the other side of the table or tap someone on the leg. You know what I mean? Just some kind of phenomena that may occur. So then it became controversial. Who put it there? Of course, Marjorie said that Houdini put it there as a plant. And then, of course, Houdini said, no, you put it there to cheat. And this went on and on. In the meantime, the spirit Walter was very upset by this. And I think it was early 1926, proclaimed that Houdini would be dead by Halloween. And Houdini did die on Halloween.
Right.
So that actually came true, which was pretty crazy. So that was like a big thing. And then Arthur Conan Doyle, in the meantime, following Houdini's death, who was also friends with Houdini, but Doyle was a huge believer in spiritualism, a really big evangelist. He was convinced Marjorie was real. But ultimately, the panel sided with Houdini. She did not win the prize. And things came out later that further showed that she was a fake. But how she did these things, to me, is still quite remarkable and somewhat mysterious as well. I also wanted to just go back in time a little bit to the Davenport brothers, who followed the Fox sisters by just a few years. They were from Buffalo, so that same region of Western New York. And these guys, two brothers, young, also teenagers, young boys, and they would sit in chairs and would be tied to their chairs, like have their hands tied behind their back. And their father apparently taught them how to escape from rope ties. And then they'd have instruments that would play. So the lights would go out, they'd be tied up, and all of a sudden instruments would make noise. I won't say play, I'll just say they made noise. And you might get hit in the head by a banjo or whatever, because they would loosen themselves up at least enough so they could wave instruments around and make noises, and then retie themselves before the lights came on. So at a show in New York City where people were lining up to see these guys, a police officer was in attendance, and he lit up a lantern, and he saw what was happening, and he's like, oh. And of course they were like, oh, well, no, sometimes the spirits don't want to cooperate and we have to put on a show, so that's why we had to cheat this time, but usually it's the spirits. They're making excuses. But they were kind of rushed out of New York City because of that. They ran back to Buffalo with their tails between their legs, but that didn't stop them. So that was a big thing, right? Like, but they didn't care because there was money to be made. So they developed what became known as a spirit cabinet. And this was a cabinet with 3 sections. On the ends were sections with chairs that they would go in, and they would get tied up in the chairs, and the door would close, and it was elevated on like 3 sawhorses. So imagine this big cabinet elevated on 3 sawhorses, so you could see beneath it. And you knew that this guy was on this side and this guy was on this side. And in the middle was another door with a little window carved out on the door. And then you'd see the instruments flying back and forth in that little window, and you hear the noises. And then you'd open up the cabinet, and you'd see they were still tied to the chairs. They were doing the same thing, but now they were doing it with doors closed so that you couldn't turn on a light and catch them. And that went on for decades. So anyway, lots of really fascinating, fun stories. By the way, they never said that they were spiritualists themselves. They just put on the show. And let people believe what they wanted to believe. But I kind of love that one.
Over these years, with these different personalities coming forward and developing their own followings, or at least, I could compare it to folks who are following a content creator and an influencer on the internet. Were there any cases or individuals who not only captured the public imagination, the great X-Files mantra of "I want to believe," but who really did seem authentic among all of these different showwomen, presenters, mystics, or con people? was there any well-known actor individuals who came away with their reputations intact, and even having some of the experts scratch their heads about, this one I can't figure out?
Yeah, there were a few, I would say. Marjorie was very close, with Houdini being the one that really was like, no. Another one that a lot of people believed in was Eusapia Palladino. A lot of people, this was an Italian medium who, a psychical researcher named Hereward Carrington was a big believer in her and presented her to all kinds of scientists in Italy and then in America, New York. Eventually, people kind of figured out what she was doing as well, but there was a lot of belief in her. But one I would say that maybe did come away pretty unscathed was an early one around the time of the Fox sisters, but also predating her just a little bit, or predating them a little bit, was D.D. Hume. And he was a guy who had moved to America as a youth and grew up in Connecticut, and then started just discovering these sort of mediumistic skills, we'll say, and began traveling around the US and Europe performing these stunts. And he would often not do them for money, but more for like, room and board and gifts or whatever might be given to him. But what he was most known for was levitating. And he apparently would like rise to the ceiling or go. There's a great story. Again, this is all covered in Chasing Ghosts, but he's in a tall building. I forgot how tall it was exactly, but there's two open windows. And he apparently goes out one window, floats back in the other. And all these people swear that this is what happened.
Oh my gosh.
And they're feeling him levitate above them. And so he's doing these pretty remarkable feats. And there's certainly some writings I found where people are trying to describe what they think happened at that time or how he may have been doing this and pulling it off. And, is this just a situation of people, suggestive thinking, like they're told what's going to happen and they want to believe. And so then they see it the way you want them to see it, or they remember it the way they heard it was going to be, so there's different things like that how the brain can kind of be fooled a little bit and steer towards believing one thing or another and believing it because of that. But there's no like hard evidence. No one like caught him in the act of something and said, oh, there's what you're doing. It's all more conjecture. So he's, I think, a pretty rare case of one who came through it all, and no one had that sort of silver bullet to say how he was doing it all.
Fascinating.
One
thing that caught me completely off guard was that out of this movement, one faction or an individual or some group of believers decided that, a spirit narrative had placed paradise not on Earth or in the clouds, but on Mars.
Yeah.
What the heck? That's a heck of a commute, although I guess if you're dead, 30 million miles is not that big a deal. But where did that come from? Do you remember offhand?
Yeah, so Mars was very popular in the late 1800s, as it is now. But there was a lot of, I mentioned this briefly earlier, that there was a lot of belief in intelligent life on Mars.
Right. We thought there were canals. Lowell, a famous astronomer.
Right. Lowell was picking that a lot, in the late 1800s. That was a big, he was writing books, using newspapers all the time, lecturing across the country. So there were a lot of people who were, believing that this was possible. And there were lots of people agreeing with this and supporting it and having their, theories as well. So there were mediums who I think were I think capitalizing on this phenomena. So their spirits were traveling to Mars and describing it. And if you read some of these descriptions, they kind of mirror what Lowell was saying about life on Mars, with they're living by the canals. But this was more about spirits seeing what life was like on Mars. But then there were also people who were writing about Mars as a utopian place because it was a place to project what Mars could be, and wouldn't it be better here on Earth if we could be like the Martians? Because if the Martians were so advanced, they were better off. Then they gotten through things that we had not yet worked through. And so that's how these mediums were kind of treating Mars. And there was one book I wrote about in the Big Book of Mars, where it's just written by two women of the West. That's what it says it's written by. Their names aren't given in the book, but they're describing Mars as a place where women have all these rights. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Women are CEOs of companies, and they can vote, and they can do all the things that women do now, but not in the late 1800s. So they were using Mars as a blank canvas to project what life should be like. And wouldn't it be great if it was like that here too? And so there was that, and then there were people using Mars as a way to show how devout the Martians were, how religious they were, and because of that, they were living better. If we're more religious and devout here on Earth, maybe we'll live better too, just like the Martians. So you had Mars being used in a lot of ways like that to promote our own ideals here on Earth. And yeah, but in this particular case, in the Talking Dead, there's a lot of fun thoughts about what's going on Mars. So this medium said that she journeyed to Mars from Earth on February 23rd, 1882. And when she got there, she met, all these amazing Martians. Everything there is gorgeous and beautiful, made from the best materials. They all communicate by thought instantly. There's no need to talk like you and I are talking. We can just think to each other because we're so advanced. So it's just a whole description of what society's like and how advanced it is. And it's that idea of we could do better here, just like they're doing, in a way to sort of show people an example. Maybe we should start acting more like that here, and we'll be better off as well. So I think a lot of people are using Mars in that sense.
In tackling this subject, again, you are a natural historian in a certain area of studies. Did you come away with your preconceptions altered or reinforced, or pretty much unscathed, and just having reported how any major differences thinking about your own attitudes on this aspect of spiritualism coming into the subject and now upon reflection?
So I would say I went into it pretty open-minded, for one thing. So I didn't have a hard belief one way or the other. I wasn't trying to push one way or the other. Yeah. I really do find the stories fascinating, whether if they're fake. I think it's fascinating how they were faked and how they were discovered. Yeah. If they're kind of unknown, like the D.D. Hume case, I find that really fascinating. Like, okay, well, what was going on? There's a few others in that vein as well, that like, how do they possibly find that information? How could they have possibly known these things? So I find those things fascinating. I would say, and also in Chasing Ghosts, I talked to various more modern day parapsychologists who study these things, and got some really fascinating stories that just seem really hard to explain. And there are certainly things in the world of paranormal that can be explained through science, things that affect our eyeballs and our brains in ways that we just don't even recognize, that can cause supernatural type of phenomena, like, seeing shadowy figures in the corner of your eye through infrasound, things like that. But then there's all these other things that science doesn't explain that happen with people. So you still have this window of mystery that's open, even if science maybe answers a few things. And not to say that just because science can't answer it, that is the answer. It's just saying, here's a possibility, right? I would say ultimately, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I didn't come to like one conclusion or the other specifically, that there is an afterlife or there's not. But ultimately, I think that there's enough compelling evidence to think that there might be something else that's out that happens, that there could be some kind of version of an afterlife that we experience. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, I prefer to believe that, because the alternative to me is really bleak and sad, which is you're in that box 6 feet underground in darkness, and that's it. There's nothing. I'd rather think that somehow there's some sort of something else going on that we're part of after that. Our spirit in some way continues on. I don't think that we're coming back through Ouija boards. I think maybe there'd be other ways we could do things if we wanted to, ideally. But I like to think that there might be something.
You've reminded me of a wonderfully, well, that's not the right word, a very unnerving footnote to this Victorian period, which was there are certainly a number of documented incidences where people were thought to have died, and in fact were not dead,
Oh yeah,
but in a coma or something,
premature
and
burial.
exactly premature burial, and that it became such a concern of Victorians who could afford to be interred in, a regular cemetery, that there are still graves that have a bell
Yeah,
that was mechanically rigged to have a person's hand on it. And if you woke up in that period of time where you were still alive, whoever even wants to consider that, you could ring the bell, which is, well, that's enough to keep you up for every night for the rest of your life. And has
yeah,
been touched on in a number of wonderful B movies over the years.
yes.
But another reason to hope that all of this was real, because that was just too terrible to contemplate.
That's where "Saved by the Bell" comes from. The phrase.
Of course. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
Well,
And
there's a
there were
dereliction
people
of the term.
innovating all kinds of coffins that were designed for these kinds of things. The bell. There, others had like little compartments for snacks in case you were there. You'd have some food ready. Like this was like a thing going on, was devising these different kinds of coffins to accommodate you in case you were not dead. Because people would go into like a trance, like you said, a coma, or there's another disease I'm forgetting what it's called exactly right now, but you would appear to be dead, but you weren't. But you'd be buried, and they would find some of these people too late, and you'd see like the scratchings on the inside of the coffin from their nails, like trying to get out but trapped. Horrifying. That's like the greatest fear.
Very low on my list of ways to exit the earth, right up there with being eaten alive by animals, but a different spirit. Some of the questions that come up were so childlike for me. And so, well, if I'm going to ask questions, I might as well ask big ones. What is God like? And then at the other extreme, do spirits eat and drink, and where do they live? What were some of the answers that were put forward to folks asking these questions?
Well, they did talk about things like that, like that they don't have to eat or drink. They can take on whatever form they want. They can take different shapes. And there's lots of these different kinds of things coming through. I tried to jot down a few of these also to talk about. So I thought some of them were actually quite fun. They were impervious to physical obstacles in weather. So they could pass through walls, which, is what you think of with a ghost, right? One of them even said that they were capable of riding on a tornado without harm.
Wow.
So they could do these things. They had time wasn't like we think of it here. There weren't days. There weren't hours and minutes. They said that their days were divided by activities like work, study, and recreation. So that was one revelation, that these spirits, and these were just random spirits that mediums were pulling through, no one notable or anything like that. They talked about, let me see here. I mentioned choosing their size,
Yes.
no money. They had a trading system based on exchanging ideas, acts of love and friendliness. There was another thing where, like, your outfit, you didn't have outfits, but your wardrobe was sort of like the color of it sort of indicated your advanced levels of being a good person. So it's almost like these spirits would know whether you were good or bad by the color of your outfit, because that's what you were basically given. There were a lot of these interesting thoughts. They were always about like how wonderful things were. Everything was wonderful, and God was, of course, glorious. All these things. Trying to think, there's some other fun ones.
I remember a less enlightened outfit idea that was put forward in grade school, and that I certainly considered at the time, which was, when you die, the outfit that you're wearing is the outfit that you're going to wear for the rest of eternity. So always have that in mind when you select your wardrobe in the morning.
You better look good. That might be it.
Mark, we have blown through our first hour, and we're going to take a 5-minute break. Peter Robbins here. The show's Meanwhile Here on Earth. My special pre-Halloween guest tonight is Marc Hartzman, and we will see you in 5.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from UnXmedia. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to research a haunted house can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unxmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unxmedia.com or amazon.com. The UnX Network presents a health and wellness spiritually based brand of hemp-derived CBD products made by Hopewell Farm in Harrogate, Tennessee. We apply our Cathara energy work with all of our plants and products. Our products made in small batches with only 2 ingredients of pure hemp, full-spectrum crude oil, and coconut-derived MCT oil. Third-party lab tested for potency and legal THC levels with 6 strengths of 1 ounce oil to choose from. Know what you're buying and get what you pay for from Hopewell Farm. Applied directly to a specific area, Hopewell Farm topical salve in 1 ounce and ½ ounce sizes, made with pure hemp crude oil, comfrey extract, and all natural ingredients. Find the Hopewell Farm link and coupon code on the UnX Network website at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com.
And welcome back. Meanwhile, here on Earth, Peter Robbins here, and my special guest tonight, Mr. Marc Hartzman, and welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's start right here. Your new book is almost 300 pages, and again, you are an award-winning art director. And one of the things I have admired about your work from the time that we first connected and became friends is, as somebody with a background in the arts and design, your books are laid out and designed in a way that adds to the enjoyment of reading them. And it's something that you've got to see to appreciate. There are folks that, they read for the content. Other people are bibliophiles and they want that book. But I'm just going through some of the layout and the pages. It feels wonderfully welcoming and kind of fun, spooky in a way. Also, you've got such a great eye for period illustration and detail. You mentioned Julia earlier. What was the Blue Island, the experience of the new arrival from beyond the veil? Can you tell us just a little insight into this chapter?
Yeah, so this was actually, I'll show you. Here, let me show you one thing here. This is actually the original book that was coming from, which is
When was
I
that
love.
published?
I think around 1901 or so. Let me double check. 1900.
What a library you have.
And then, yeah, here's I think this is the image I have in there. William Stead, the publisher,
Yes. There you
editor,
go.
and there were two women, Julia and her friend Ellen, and they decided that if one of them died, they were going to communicate with each other. And so Julia died, and so Ellen was getting these messages that Stead was then writing about. And so this comes from his book about all this, and it's kind of like the things we talked about earlier. Like Julia is describing to her friend Ellen what the other side is like. So she has just a few simple examples. Here, let me give you a couple really quick. But they're just sort of brief things about the other side, and one of them I thought was pretty interesting. So I just gave a few examples. I'm pulling from that book I just showed you. One of them I thought was kind of fun was this Bureau of Communication that she wanted. So she wanted a Bureau of Communication between the two sides. Could you not establish some sort of office with one or more trustworthy mediums, if it were to enable the sorrowing on earth to know, if only for once, that their so-called dead live nearer them than ever before, it would help to dry many a tear and soothe many a sorrow. I think you could count on the cooperation of all of this side. So that was something she was like, oh, can we have this whole new system set up on Earth to help us communicate better? So again, just getting into things like that. The life beyond, here she says, I find it so difficult to explain how we live and how we spend our time. We never weary and do not need to sleep as we did on Earth. Neither do we need to eat or drink. We discussed that earlier. These things were necessary for the material body. Here we do not need them. I think we can best teach you what we experience by asking you to remember those moments of exaltation, when in the light of the setting or rising sun, you look out happy and contented upon the landscape over which the sun's rays have shed their magical beauty. There is peace, there is life, there is beauty. Above all, there is love. Beauty everywhere, joy and love. Love is the secret of heaven. God is love. And when you are lost in love, you are found in God. So, like, not a whole lot of specificity there. but
I'll say.
But these were the kinds of things that Julie was communicating from the afterlife to her friend Ellen, which are all captured in that book. So again, a few excerpts I've presented here.
Edgar Allan Poe is such a fixture as kind of a godfather of the modern horror story, and at the same time wrote beautiful, if tragic, poetry about love. But how could this movement have emerged without leaving him alone? Without leaving him alone. And again, was he somebody who came up in a famous case, or there were reports of many people channeling or being in contact with him in the afterlife?
There were several people who were talking to Edgar Allan Poe and writing down new poems from him. Here's one that's an untitled poem. You can see it's all in here. And there was another one. There's one called "The Lost Soul." I mentioned earlier also that some of them were saying that Edgar Allan Poe was apologizing for writing about the macabre and the dark, and that there was really light on the other side. Kind of the similar thoughts that we just heard from Julia. There's a spirit poem on the raven in here. That was from 1856. Thomas Lake Harris claimed to have channeled the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe, who apparently wanted to offer a new version of one of his most famous poems, The Raven. So again, capitalizing on their fame, but then giving it like the kind of twist that they want. It's just fascinating how they're trying to recreate these famous people's writings in their own words, supposedly coming straight from them.
I'll say. And not an American, but one of the great wits of the time, Oscar Wilde, famously jailed for being a homosexual in England, How did he get pulled into the afterlife business?
Well, so I brought up a couple of his comments earlier, how he was coming back to just rave and rant about other contemporary writers at the time. The most famous person he talked about, at least most famous to us now, was James Joyce, and he was just saying how much he hated Ulysses, and he goes on and on about, which I thought was quite funny. So
And continued to hate it after he died. Now that's impressive.
Yeah, so I was excited to find comments from him to include. That was fun.
This is a wonderful illustration. What are we seeing here?
I think that's an image from Sleepy Hollow. From Washington Irving, who also came back. So, he, of course, wrote about lots of ghosts. This was a visit to Henry Clay that he was talking about. We bring that one up really quick.
A great orator.
Yeah. So this was a visit to Henry Clay. He was writing about just, again, what that was like. And the image here, this was Irving wrote of many ghosts before allegedly writing from the spirit world himself. So this image was an artist just portraying Sleepy Hollow's Ichabod Crane, imagining a phantom. So that's what that image was. Yeah. So not meant to be Washington Irving, just a ghost-like image related to Washington Irving for that one. But yeah, it's a beautiful image.
Back of the book. And okay, we are shifting gears here now. And some of these images are shocking, even though, we are a very jaded culture at this point in so many ways. And we not only are conditioned to see outrages and horrors, but in very high quality images. There's something about some of these sepia tones and an image of, a professional performer who is, as they would have called them back then, a freak, with a poignancy. And remembering these people had lives. This is actually a book I found put together with a great deal of affection and respect for the individuals that you were dealing with here. And the other thing, I think this is also a mark of your knowledge and sophistication in the world of visual images. You recreate these scrapbook, which you almost feel like you're looking over somebody's shoulder. It's very personal. Where did this come from?
So this was something I'm really excited to have gotten done through my Curious Publications project. Shortly after my book American Sideshow came out, I was contacted by the great niece of that woman, rubber skin lady, and you see her in that top row of images. She had that stretchy skin she pulled out from just beneath, from her thighs.
Fascinating.
So she had contacted me through Facebook and described, who she was, and she had this scrapbook from her great aunt Agnes Schwarzenbacher, who's also known as Agnes Schmidt in the sideshow world. This was mostly like 1930s, and I was fascinated by it. And for years I wanted to be able to just republish that scrapbook,
right?
But I always thought, like, oh, someday, they lived in Wisconsin. Like, someday I'll get a trip out to Wisconsin, photograph it, we'll figure it out. But in the meantime, I was busy with my day job, busy with other books. So it was kind of on the back burner for me until COVID time hit and I had time. That's when I started Curious Publications, republishing old obscure books or writings I compiled, like we just talked about from the Talking Dead. So her husband, during COVID early on, was also like me, had a lot of time on his hands. And so he photographed every page of that scrapbook as it is, so that this book completely recreates a scrapbook. And it is very personal because it has you can see her notes, for example, there. Yes. It has pictures of her family in the back. But these are all the people she worked with. She either has her own photos of them or their own pitch cards that they were selling, in some cases signed to her, newspaper clippings, photos of herself. You see her there on that the right-hand page, and you see Frida Pushnik as the woman with no arms or legs there, who was a friend of hers. She was a very famous sideshow performer. So it's really a remarkable document of her sideshow travels in the 1930s, and her family. I wrote a whole introduction in this book. It's a limited edition book that we made. I have bios of the performers, everyone I can identify in the back of the book. So it's the full scrapbook plus some information as well. But Agnes was someone who was, pretty common at that time. The families were ashamed of people like that. There's the three-legged man, Francesco Lentini, who had 4 feet. You see him in that upper right-hand image. But, they were ashamed of Agnes. They just wanted her to either hide it all or just, stay public. And she said, I want to do that. So she went to work in the sideshow, and you could see she had this camaraderie. She had people she could be friends with who were also different. She met her husband there. She traveled the world. She became, a star, and she could live. She didn't really have options back then otherwise.
Yes.
So I was so excited to be able to reproduce this whole scrapbook. Anyone who's interested in sideshow, I think this is just a remarkable document. And like I said, I tried to add as much information as possible for anyone who wants to read it.
Boy, I'll say.
Yeah, and one thing, I didn't show you the image of the cover, but this great niece, her name is Dory, she told me how she found this scrapbook, I think when she was young, in her mom's attic. And the scrapbook, the cover of it does not indicate what's inside the scrapbook. The cover has like pictures of 2 puppies on it. So imagine you're a little kid and you see this old scrapbook with 2 puppies on it, and then you open it and it's not puppies inside or kitties. It's the sideshow.
And
that must have been like, for her, like, oh my goodness, what is this?
Totally.
So that's all again republished in this book.
And
yeah, just a sampling of the tiles we have. Spectropia, that one in the lower left corner, is one I love. That cover art is just gorgeous.
Yeah.
That's from the 1800s, and that one's like a early interactive book where you stare at these illustrations of ghosts at a certain spot. Like each one has like a little dot or asterisk on it, and you stare at it for 20 seconds or so, and then you look at a blank wall or your ceiling, and you'll see that after image, that ghost kind of drift by in front of you.
Eek.
Way to see ghosts.
All right, let's talk about this.
This is one of my favorites. So I collect a lot of old books, and I have this from the mid 1800s called the Book of Wonderful Characters, and it just, that's exactly what it is. It's just filled with probably a couple hundred really odd, eccentric characters from 1800s through centuries past at that point, and filled with illustrations of these unusual people, and that ranges from people with physical anomalies to just like be 165 years old, or someone who walked a lot, like walked hundreds of miles, or just odd sorts of things. That gives this very thorough description of them and what was known about these people's lives.
It's bit of a precursor to Ripley in a way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it is. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, illustrations, and then just peculiar. So this one, that's hardcover. We have paperback as well, but I designed this. That's the pig face lady who's seen on the frontispiece of the book. On the back of it, I don't think I sent you the back cover, did I? But on the back is one of my favorite characters, the Little Man of Nuremberg, and I have a copy of it here, so I can show you. But this is the back of the book.
Wow.
And so you can see he just had like stumps for arms and feet, but this guy could do everything. He did cups and ball magic tricks. He was a sharpshooter. He played instruments. He was married 4 times. And I don't think you'll be able to tell, but if you look at the curls in his hair, if you have a really good look at that, that's all the Psalms of the Bible written in those curls that he did. He illustrated this himself. It's a self-portrait. So I really love this book. On the inside cover, this is the original cover that from my copy. I just photo of the actual thing. It's printed there.
Beautiful.
yeah, it's a beautiful book. There's
Outstanding. Yes,
yeah,
that little library behind you, I think more and more of our viewers would like to spend a little time in your study there.
oh yeah, there we go. Yeah. There's Matthew Buckinger, the Little Man Nuremberg, right there on the title page.
Memoirs and Anecdotes.
Yeah, it's got a much longer subtitle.
Remarkable and eccentric persons in all ages and countries.
Yeah,
Well
it's
done,
a great collection.
Henry Wilson and James Caulfield. And that, again, in that haunting image on the left, it looks like she is holding on to a giant muff.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
I haven't even thought of a muff in decades, I'm sure, but what the heck? Either that or a wasp nest.
Yeah, that's where my head was going. It's like, looks like she's got a animal wasp nest or something.
No, if you're going to stand out, why not?
In case I wasn't strange enough, this guy I love, Joseph Clark, who was sort of a, had all sorts of weird physical anomalies. He could shift his body in different ways, kind of weird contortionism. He's actually on the, I've got that same picture on the spine of the book. So I just kind of love it. But yeah, again, just a weird contortionist guy, and he did sort of weird things. Could like look like he was growing a few inches, or it talks about how he would confuse tailors. So when they were making his clothes, like, wait, you were just, this height. Now you're this height. And like just these weird little anecdotes about these people. There's an armless woman writing with her feet, as you can see there.
Oh gosh.
Without arms. So you have that range of, like I said, human anomalies, but then also just other strange people. There's another woman who like lived in the snow for weeks or something like that, like just trapped in snow. Just again, eccentric characters.
Wow.
The Sight of Hell. Yeah, this is one of my favorite ones that I republished with Curious. This is a very, very weird book. I should have sent you the original cover, which is printed inside the book, but this was part of a series from the late 1800s, written by, if you can see at the bottom, Sight of Hell, written by John Furness, which I found funny. Not spelled like a furnace, but still, nevertheless, a furnace. So really thematic. But it was part of a series called Books for Children. And this was like weird straight in the 1870s, because it talks about how if you do anything bad, you're going to go to hell. And this is what hell is like. And it talks about how demons are going to be poking at you and prodding at you for millions and millions of years. And like your skin's going to be boiling. And that could happen if you go to a dance and you're dancing, you're going to hell. And this is what it will be like for millions and millions of years. It's just demons and blood boiling and all these things.
Bad enough, but the whole cat's mouth thing adds a whole nother dimension of terror and awfulness.
Every page in this book is horrifying, but in like a humorous way at this point. But you imagine what that was like. Books for children.
I think I'll behave for the rest of my life, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want that. I don't want demons poking at me for millions of years.
Terrific.
And I've added these are all public domain images of hell that I put into the book, just to add to it.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, that was a fun one to do. That's just, again, a really obscure book, but I was excited to bring that one back just because it is so truly bizarre.
Now let's talk a little bit about this. It's a tangent, but one I find very exciting, and a public service for people looking for completely non-standard information. Many years ago, I stumbled on Dover Press, an inexpensive a company that produced inexpensive but good quality books with no copyright, and got them out there for a very reasonable price. Tell us a bit about this publishing company that is allowing you to bring back more and more of these wonderful books in their original form, and how folks can access their website and see what's available and start to add some of these to their libraries.
Yeah, so this is curiouspublications.com. So you'll see all the books there. And yeah, it is. It's just finding books that are in the public domain that are just really odd and obscure and kind of lost to history that I'm able to bring back. And, I find the text is accessible online through often through the Gutenberg Project or archive.org. You can just pull the text. I go through it and lay it out and clean everything up. So this is not like crappy scans of books. Not Dover, but other companies, they just reissue stuff and looks like garbage, when you get it. But this is all cleaned up and cared for. I go through it line by line to make sure everything is formatted properly. I mean, you saw some of the layouts that you showed. And then, it's just, bring it back into publication and make it accessible again for people. And for me, it's just something I enjoy doing. Not only do I like sharing these old weird things that, bring me joy and entertainment, but the process of bringing it back, I enjoy as well. I kind of just love it. And, we sell what we sell, and it's more for the joy of doing it. There's the full cover.
There's the cover.
Yeah, I mean, is that not a gorgeous cover? That's mid 1800s. Wow. Look at that typography. It's just
what a fabulously right on the money green. Whoa.
Yeah, I saw this. This was the first one I did to republish old public domain books, because it's mostly a book of illustrations that I mentioned. You see the ghost image of. But I just love that cover so much. So this was a kind of a fun one to start with.
I actually can't wait to go through this. Spectoria. What a great word.
Yeah. And this is one, like, if you want to buy an original copy, it's, usually runs $800 to $1,000 to get one.
Sure.
So this one's,
less
$16.
What a wonderfully arcane title. Spectral illusions showing ghosts everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And any color.
Yeah, any color. Yeah.
Oh,
it's interesting too that the last page in here is actually not a ghost, it's a rainbow. And when you stare at the rainbow, it's not the full colors of the rainbow. But when you stare at it and then you get the after image effect, the colors are reversed. The colors you see are reversed from what you stared at. So there's an intro in here from the author. I wrote an intro, and then there's a intro from the original book. That kind of just discusses how the eyeball works and why you're seeing these things and how all that's creating these ghostly effects.
That's fabulous.
Pretty interesting. Yeah.
Another book of yours that really moved me. It really is so lush in images with such interesting copy to back everything up. And once again, really, really so wonderfully laid out. I mean, if you appreciate good design as well as great content, your books really are a notch above. Well, you're welcome. And it's simply stating a fact. I was going to say that was Johnny Eccles, who was in the movie Freaks that you were mentioning earlier, 1932. So Johnny's one of the stars of that film, and that's his twin brother. He's equal size. Doubly poignant.
Yeah. One of the stories I love about them was that they did a trick with a magician in the 1930s, and they would call up his brother Robert. That was Robert Eck, the twin brother you see there. He would go up as a volunteer and get in the box and be sawed in half. When he would open the cabinet and he would step out to go back to a seat in the audience, to the audience applauding, he would split in two, and the legs would run off stage one way and the torso would run off the stage the other way. And they obviously replaced Johnny, and he would stand on top of a little person's shoulders who had pants pulled up over his head.
Oh, no.
And it freaked people out. People fainted, screamed. They had to stop doing it.
I guess I think I might be among them. Damn. No. Who needs special effects?
Yeah.
Okay. This book really was the perfect precursor to your newest book. And when you finished writing Chasing Ghosts, did you think you would be kind of picking it up again and chasing a whole different variety of them in a different direction?
Well, so Chasing Ghosts goes into a lot of different stories about spiritualism and ghost hunting, haunted places, lots of different aspects of the afterlife and the paranormal. So research for Chasing Ghosts involved a lot of the stuff that's in The Talking Dead, but more about the situation. You know, it's a little bit more of my narrative of what was going on at the time and explaining it, which I love to do and give you more context of what was going on and tell the different stories. But I loved some of those messages coming through so much that I thought, well, this could be its own book as well, where I'm not getting into all the explanatory context of the time, but just here's what this person said, and just kind of let you enjoy that. And, you know, with a brief introduction of who the medium was, or who the spirit was, whatever it might be, right? So, for example, I talk about Jap Heron, the Mark Twain book in here, and about some of the stories I told you about the publisher suing, all those things. That's all in Chasing Ghosts, whereas The Talking Dead gives you 2 or 3 chapters of Jap Heron. Here it is, you know, a little setup, and then here's the actual writings. So they're different in that way, but you know, they kind of work together. They were sort of happening in parallel. It was just a way to tell more in a different way and share more.
As you know, I'm a fan as well as a friend, but of all the books that I've read of yours so far and enjoyed each one in a different way, the one that absolutely knocked me flat and that I recommend regularly to people here and friends in England is The Embalmed Head of Oliver Cromwell, a memoir. I think, number one, for any American to have the chutzpah to take on what's not only an English subject, but one devoted to one of the most polarizing individuals in the history of England. How did it begin? Where did you even come up with the idea to take off in a direction that, well, no one ever had?
Well, so that's a good question. There's a specific answer. So I was actually researching an idea that would be a book about the afterlives, posthumous adventures of body parts. And I had recently read a book about called Cranioclepty by Colin Dickey. It was about sort of the beginnings of phrenology.
Okay.
And in that book, part of the story of phrenology, that's where, you know, you're figuring out people's personalities by the bumps and ridges on their skull. So initially, skulls you would have access to were executed criminals. But a guy who was early on studying phrenology with, you know, one of the early people who were creating this whole branch of pseudoscience, we'll call it, was friends with Joseph Haydn in Austria. And Haydn, of course, was a genius, and he was about to die. And this friend was much younger. And he's like, well, once Haydn dies, I'm going to pay off the gravedigger and get his skull. And I'm going to study the skull of a genius and advance the studies of phrenology. So he did that. And Haydn's skull traveled for 145 years before it was returned to its body and reburied. So I thought, wow, that's such a crazy story that this head traveled for 145 years. I bet there's other stories. And I knew of a few. I knew like Galileo's fingers. So I started making a list of these different posthumous adventures. And I came across Oliver Cromwell's head. And of course, I knew who Oliver Cromwell was, but I didn't know that his head traveled for 300 years, more than twice as long as Joseph Haydn's. And so I said, okay, forget that idea, which I'm glad I did, because I found out shortly after I was working on that list that a book had just come out called Rest in Pieces by Bess Lovejoy, who's become a friend as well. So she basically did that book anyway. So it was too late for me. I didn't know at that time. But I had pivoted because I had the idea to make it a memoir. And once I had that idea, it just popped in my head like, oh, it'd be cool to tell the story from the head's point of view across 300 years. Very ambitious. I recognize that. I'm not gonna actually do this. But once I had the idea, I couldn't get it out of my own head. It was stuck in my head, and I had to do it. And so I have in the back of the book, there's kind of an outline of all the real events that the head
Nice.
follows the true history. But because it's from the head's point of view, there's a lot of gaps you have to fill in. You got to carry your story forward. So there's imagined anecdotes as well, but they're all based on real historical events and characters. So I have him actually encountering the head of Joseph Haydn in a phrenologist's office, because we know Haydn was studied by a phrenologist, but Cromwell's head was also studied by a phrenologist. They have quotes from a real phrenology report on Cromwell's head. And so while that phrenologist is discussing this to the then, possessor of Cromwell's head, so they're having their own conversation about the head, but then there's a side conversation of Cromwell's head and Joseph Haydn's head having their own conversations, because the dead can communicate with each other, as I've determined in this book, because I get to set those rules.
Yes. And what one of the things that captivated me was, first, the magic realism of, I'm going to declare something as factual for my purposes as a creative writer here, and then absolutely straight-faced approach it respectfully, and not be making jokes about it as I go along. This head had a life, and in my version here, it sees things, it learns things, it goes through things, and it develops opinions. It has different homes. It observes different human situations. And you manage to bring it off in a way, this is not written in Middle English, but your sensitivity to the English aspects of the English language enough to make it believable in the way that the head uses words. Once you kind of allow yourself to get into the spirit, I guess there's sort of a pun there, it's an adventure story, and you hope that things are going to work out for your main character, despite the awkwardness of, how he lost his head. And then the fact that in reality, the head was on a pike. Things get weathered, they change, they don't look very good. The head itself at the same time carries itself with a certain amount of dignity, and conscious of the fact that losing his looks to a certain degree, and some very poignant moments also with other non-living entities as well as living ones. Once you got into this, this is really, for me, kind of a writer's dream, that you can get lost in a world that you have created, built on an actual reality, but it's a fantasy, and one that, without giving anything away, resolves very poignantly, and left me knowing that I was going to reread the book at a certain point in the future. Not quite ready yet, but I'm ready at that point, as I do with certain books that we, interface with in our lives, to let enough time go by to enjoy it another time. And once again, an outstanding cover.
Thank you. I love this cover. This was illustrated by an old partner of mine. I'm in advertising. It's my day job. So this was one of my first partners I worked with, who's a phenomenal illustrator named V. Long. And we talked about this over lunch one day, because I wanted him to I thought he'd make a great cover for it. And he literally sketched it on a cocktail napkin, like that cliche. No, I have the napkin still.
Oh, that's awesome.
He sat there, he sketched it out. He's like, well, we could do something like this. And, he was showing me updates along the way as he was going. I think we have maybe a time lapse of this cover being built on the site, but yeah, he just did a gorgeous job. It's all by hand.
Yes.
He doesn't.
Nothing.
He doesn't use a ruler. Nothing. Yeah. He just.
It's one of the things I love about it, and that it's referential to another favorite graphic artist, Edward Gorey, whose
Yeah.
work we all love, but he is his own person. It's just a great book, and I highly recommend it. And I'm going to take one moment here because I actually have, sitting on my homepage, as one does, the head, the death mask.
The photo, or the death mask, because there's a photo of the head from the 1930s.
And there is Oliver Cromwell.
Yeah. When I was researching this book, I went, so the head is, this doesn't really give anything away, but the head is currently buried. So it was from 1661 to 1960. That's the 300 years his head traveled. It was reburied in the antechapel of Sidney Sussex College at Cambridge.
Yeah.
So I went to Sidney Sussex, and it was great to be able to walk around and kind of see, like, okay, so this was where he was. These were the things he saw, and the paths he walked at that campus. Yeah. You know, what was there at the time, in the 1600s.
Yeah.
So it was great to be there and just be able to describe things, because I was physically staying in the places where he was. And then they had in their archives there, I was able to go into their archives, and the archivist handed me an envelope stuffed with files on the head, just shoved into an envelope, like really like packed in there. Was kind of unusual. Should take better care of this stuff. Unfolding newspaper clippings, handwritten letters, typed the handwritten letters from the early 1800s.
Oh my gosh.
Very difficult to read.
Oh.
And I was so happy when I got into the age of typewriters. Okay. Information is so much easier for me to process now with it typed out and these letters going on about the head and the authenticity. There was a lot of discussion about the authenticity of the head. That gets covered in the book, of course, because Cromwell's like, of course I'm real, but there's lots of doubt and everything. But it was really fun researching that. And, I appreciate what you said about the language. I took a lot of care to make sure language I was using was period appropriate.
Yes.
And that I wasn't using language that wasn't used yet. So if these words were not being used in, say, the late 1600s, I wasn't going to use them. So I tried to make sure that anything he was saying was something he would have learned by that time or been aware of at that time, and that he was able to understand things from other conversations. By the time he was along, he was able to learn about the world through radio broadcasts. So he was always able to be aware of things, different communications around him.
Once you enter the world of magic realism as a writer, you can make your own rules. The only thing is, once you do, you have to be true to them. Yes. And you're creating a world within a world. And one of the things I think you did very successfully is there are transition points in the head's ongoing adventures where it's going from point A to point B, or it's out for some period of time in a certain location, or has developed a relationship with another dead entity, or seems to have connected in some ways with a living one, that it all flows. It all stays true to this world that you've created. And, there was a part of me that when the head was interred with the body, finally, I felt kind of bad, because one thing I didn't know about being a dead head, not to be confused with following that great band, was that when lights are out, or, you have a cover, you're in the dark. But otherwise, even though you don't have eyes, you see just fine what's going on around you. And it was just, couldn't they give the head a little extra time, or every once in a while let it out on vacation? And what you were able to do was, when the head would encounter some technological breakthrough or something decidedly new in the environment, going from point A to point B, and reflecting on it, you never betrayed language by coming up with a contemporary word. The head did its best to understand things in its own terms.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And well, what can I say? I was just completely charmed by it, and it made me want to. And what I did, I wasn't like a major book, but just go back and refresh my knowledge, which was more limited than I had remembered, on the circumstances surrounding Cromwell's coming to power, losing power, and losing his head in the course of it, and his impact on the history of England and the United Kingdom. Your last book, before, I hope that the living dead people are honored by your honoring them. There's no way I think they can come back at you legally on this. It's a wonderful title. Your book before it, though, is the only book that you have written with a co-author. Am I correct?
Yeah, To the Hilt. Yes.
Let's talk a bit about To the Hilt, because
that's my co-author on the cover.
We did a show, right, with Dan Meyer, who, my gosh, just to be in his presence, and I would recommend to anybody that is curious about what we're about to discuss briefly, you can just go into YouTube, get Meanwhile Here on Earth, and type in Dan's name or Dan and Mark's name, and that is a show and a half. That was one for the books, as far as I'm concerned, for me. Once again, how do people end up doing what they do? Dan is a professional sword swallower, and it's his history of sword swallowing that you are assisting to bring to public attention. Where did you first have your imagination captured about sword swallowers? Was it back in, elementary school kind of time? I think that was it for me. Just that first time you hear that word as a kid, like, whoa, I need to know more about this. Do you remember where it began for you? Because it isn't a topic that many people embrace on a regular basis.
I'm pretty sure I saw my first sword swallower when I was a little kid at the Renaissance Festival in Colorado, in Larkspur, Colorado. And that sword swallower, I didn't know who it was at the time because I was a little kid, but it was probably the guy who got me into all this stuff, really writing about it, whose name was Johnny Fox. I wrote about him in the introduction to this book.
Yeah.
And I met Johnny Fox in around 1999, I think. He was running a museum in Manhattan on the Lower East Side called the Freakatorium.
Yes.
And he had this phenomenal museum of sideshow collection, his collection from touring for 25 years or so as a sword swallower. And I started talking to him, and he pulls out a sword and swallows a sword right in front of me. Like it, amazing. And as we're talking, I learned that he got his start in Boulder, Colorado, and used to work at the Renaissance Festival in Larkspur.
Oh, for gosh
sake.
Around
the time I was a little kid going there, I'm like, probably saw you. He ended up performing at the Maryland Renaissance Festival for about 20 or 30 years, till his death several years back. But he was just incredible. And so I started writing about him, and that kind of led to my writing American Sideshow, which we talked about earlier. And then I met Dan, and Dan's been researching sword swallowers for about 20 some years now, and has a site. He runs the Sword Swallowers Association International, and he has collected information on sword swallowers for, like I said, decades. So several years back, he contacted me and said, "Hey, Mark, I've got this information. I really want to make it into a book. Would you help me create this book? I want to call it To the Hilt." And I said, "That sounds like a good idea." And I said, "We need a subtitle." I said, "What do you think about a sword swallower's history of sword swallowing?" Since it's kind of coming from you, a sword swallower. And I love that, Dan's able to provide perspectives and knowledge that very few people on this planet have.
Yes.
So
yes.
It was kind of a thrill and an honor to be able to write this with him. And, I went through his research. I added research, refined everything, and wrote these biographies of about, 80 historical sword swallowers, and it's stories from about 30 to 40 modern day sword swallowers. Lots of illustrations throughout of these, photos of these sword swallowers doing what they do. It's all real. If anyone's wondering, it's all completely real. It's not fake. It's real and real dangerous. Don't try it at home, as we say several times in the book. But yeah, it was, amazing to tell these stories. No one's ever done a book just on sword swallowing. So I was really excited to be able to do something that really has not been done at all.
Well, one of the things that struck me was, aside from the fact, understandably, that blades are dulled as well as points, but it is still a metal sword, that there's no trick. You're swallowing this piece of metal, and you need to do it just right, or you can hurt yourself very badly.
Yes.
And some of the stories that you guys were talking about, I mean, I was on the edge of my seat. Also, you know, one can say, well, I've chosen to be in a rather unusual area of the entertainment business. But behind that choice, I mean, it's an obsession for a lot of these people, like I guess any area of intense focus in the arts or other human behavior. Is there something? I mean, you could say, you know, why do people climb Mount Everest? Because it's there. Where did this begin? Who was the one? What do we know about the origin of sword swallowing as opposed to their more conventional use of killing people?
Well, it's a good question. It's a hard question to answer because no one knows the exact response. And I always find it amusing to think about, who decided that maybe this was something they could do, and how many people did it take till someone actually did it? You're like, oh, that didn't work with that guy. He's gone. But I wonder if I can do it, like at what point. But usually this was something that started, the general thought is it started in India a few thousand years ago with like fakirs or shamans. Shamans would often do extraordinary things to kind of show their connection to God, or that they were superior to you in some way. Therefore, you should follow them and listen to what they say. It was a way to lead.
Sure.
And so they might swallow like a long hollow reed or something like that. There's stuff we know about that happening in the past. But there was stories of sword swallowers, fakirs doing this from, that we can see tracing pretty far back. We know that I talked about this in the intro to the book. There were Roman gladiators who would take a sword down the throat as an honorable way to die if they had lost. So they weren't performing it once, basically, and that was it, right? But then we do see evidence of a sword swallow for entertainment as early as around 180 AD, if I remember correctly. There's the earliest existing book written in ancient Roman that has, you can see the English translation where a guy is describing a sword swallower, someone performing this for entertainment. So we do see it, close to 2,000 years ago, in writing right there. That we believe it goes further back into India and spread up through Asia and eventually made its way into England. That didn't happen until the early 1800s because those kinds of things were typically thought to be maybe witchcraft or something. You might be killed for doing something like that, but eventually it became an accepted form of entertainment and comes to America also in the early 1800s and spreads from there. But yeah, it's a lot of people have had severe injuries. People have died from it. So it is, like I said, it's real and it's real dangerous. And I'm working on now, just to announce something new. I'm working on a sort of follow-up to that book with the same publisher. So I'll have a similar format. It's like a nice 8.5 by 11-inch book, full color. This is with a friend of mine I met through American Sideshow, the great Throwdini, who's arguably history's greatest knife thrower, and another knife thrower, Rick Lemberg, who's a competitive knife thrower and runs a whole competitive knife throwing program called the AIM Games. Two of the best living knife throwers. So we're writing On Point, a knife thrower's history of knife throwing. So continuing the series, and I'm writing about all these amazing knife throwers. And I've went from swords to knives, just shorter blades, but also really fascinating stories, also very dangerous. And this is a knife thrower, and you have to have the human target, of course. All these brave women. We have stories from target girls, all told from their own words about why they do this, what it means to them. So that's been a lot of fun to work on.
I guess from the time I was young, I've seen knife throwing in the movies, but I was actually shocked at how well it was recreated and how anxiety-provoking it was recreated in The Gangs of New York, with Daniel Day-Lewis working opposite Cameron Diaz at that point. Those scenes were, I mean, they weren't CGI. Knives were being thrown. And obviously, they had an expert to do it properly. But still, I encourage anybody to rewatch that part of Gangs of New York and let me know what you think. If it was CGI, it certainly went beyond me. Any
Yes.
idea when publication date on a Knife Thrower's History of Knife Throwing will be available to us?
Yeah, I'm hoping mid 2027. We're turning it in June of 26. So figure
Great.
usually these things take about a year between editing, design, printing, all these things. Usually about a 9-month to 12-month process. So I'm hoping, no later than mid 27. I'm excited for it to come out. We're making great progress with the book. We have a whole pop culture section actually. So we cover Gangs of New York.
Great.
Lots of earlier films too, and a lot of times knife throwers were brought in. There's another knife thrower who's been performing since the late 70s, a guy named Larry Sisesky, who's phenomenal. He won the Gong Show in the late 70s, opened for lots of rock bands in LA in the mid to late 70s. And he talks about working with Robert De Niro for a film called The Fan and teaching De Niro just the scene where he throws a knife, but how to do it properly. And De Niro got really into it and wanted to learn, and just describing all these experiences with him and helping other stars. Lots of knife throwers throughout film have worked to help scenes in a stunt a stunt role or throwing the knives themselves. But obviously, looks like the actor's doing it. So there's a lot of fun stories about knives in films.
Yes, no question about it. Tell our viewers where they can go to learn more about you, what you're doing, order your books. Is there a way that they can personally order them from you to get them signed or inscribed? And I would encourage anybody that is looking to order books of Marc's to see if your local bookstore will order it for you rather than giving Jeff Bezos the profit. Otherwise, though, website and any special information that will help us to keep in touch with what you're doing.
Yeah, so there's a few places for the Talking Dead and some of the other ones we talked about. That would be curiouspublications.com, and you'll see all the books, several of them that you showed earlier. And then the books I've authored and gone through, traditional publishers for, those are all on markhartzmanbooks.com. I think you had my name up here earlier, Mark with a C, of course, markhartzmanbooks.com. I'm on Instagram a lot, just at Marc Hartzman. Also, you can find at Curious Publications on Instagram. And I also run weirdhistorian.com. You can find lots of weird stuff there. And there's an Instagram for that also, just at Weird Historian. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, you can do that you can message me through Instagram, that's fine, or through the site. There's a contact form on markhartzmanbooks.com and curiouspublications.com. So either way is fine. But yeah, please order. There's links on the site. Going to a local bookstore is a great way to do it, and requesting. I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm not hard to find.
I know you, of course, have a history of speaking at more and more conferences. Right now, I know for myself, I'm done for the year. But anything that you are, where you'll be speaking next year, where folks can start to plan early, or that part of your schedule not worked out yet?
Yeah, I don't have anything lined up for speaking engagements for next year right now, actually. I should start trying to make a push for that. Usually I do more of that when something new is coming out. So we did a bunch for To the Hilt. I have another book coming out through Quirk Books, which is called Exploding Cigars and Psychic Spies, which is a history of secret government projects. But that now I don't think will be out till early 27. I'm hoping late 26.
Sounds
I'm still
great.
waiting to hear what the publisher wants to do, but that one's done. I'm just waiting on next steps. But that was a fun one. So I'm hoping to do lots of speaking engagements after that's released as well. That was
Excellent. Well, we'll be watching and waiting. And Marc Hartzman, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's great to see you, my friend. I look forward to our paths crossing corporeally and in 3 dimensions in the coming year. Please send my love to the family. And this is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Marc Hartzman. Meanwhile, here on Earth, stay well, fight for what you believe in, and we'll see you next week.